Working capital management? Huh? What on earth is that? If that's what you've been thinking all this time, wonder no more! Lia and Pia Productions is more than ready to introduce you to the wonderful world of working capital management. First things first, the concept of working capital, a term which actually comes from an old Yankee peddler who would fill his wagon with different things and go around selling them, involves three important processes. First, the peddler buys the goods on credit from a supplier. Next, he sells them and collects cash from these transactions to turn over a profit. Finally, he repays the supplier of his merchandise to show that he is worthy of a new loan. These days, the basic principle remains, but its definition has evolved. Working capital management refers to the way managers use short-term financing to fund the firm's current assets such as cash, cash equivalents, accounts receivable, inventory, and prepaid expenses. Current assets are a must-have for any business, but managers should remember that there are costs associated with holding them. If a company can reduce its current assets without hurting sales, this will definitely increase profitability. Net working capital is slightly different. It involves subtracting the sum of payables and accruals from current assets to arrive at the amount of money that the firm must obtain from non-free sources to carry its current assets. If this sounds too technical, think of it this way. Instead of borrowing money from the bank, you can just purchase your inventory from suppliers on credit. Your accountant will then record these loans as accounts payable, but these are considered free in the sense that they don't bear interest. In this scenario, net working capital is the difference between your current assets and accounts payable. Isn't it a hassle for firms to figure out how long it takes for them to pay for and collect cash from the sale of working capital? Definitely, but this is where the cash conversion cycle comes in. It measures the length of time that firms purchase or produce inventory, hold it for a time, and then sell it and receive cash. To calculate the targeted cash conversion cycle or CCC, you need to figure out three things, usually with the help of financial statements. First, you need to determine your payables deferral period, or the average length of time between the purchase of materials and labor and the payment of cash for them. Next, you need to know your inventory conversion period, or the average time required to convert raw materials into finished goods and then to sell them. Finally, you must know your average collection period, or ACP, the average length of time required to collect cash following a sale. Once you add all three of these up, you will arrive at your cash conversion cycle. After you do the math, you might want to start thinking about the various cash budget and management techniques you can use to improve your working capital. There are three main approaches when it comes to asset financing policies. First, there is the maturity matching or self-liquidating approach, where all fixed assets and permanent current assets are financed with long-term capital. Meanwhile, temporary current assets are financed with short-term debt. Next, there is the aggressive approach, where the firm finances some of its permanent assets with short-term debt. Third, there is the conservative approach, where the firm uses long-term capital to finance all permanent assets and only a small amount of short-term debt to meet its peak requirements. Now, turn your attention to inventory and receivables management. In the world of working capital, these are incredibly important as they determine how effectively a firm can manage its working capital. Inventory includes supplies, raw material, work in process, and finished goods. To arrive at the best level of inventory for the firm, you need to forecast sales accurately, especially since setting the wrong inventory levels can lead to lost sales and excessive carrying costs. Although production and marketing people usually take the lead in making these decisions, financial managers play a big role too. Financial managers are in charge of capital budgeting, or determining which assets to buy given the firm's budget. Without the proper capital budgeting, the firm won't be able to acquire the right type and amount of computer systems to track inventories. Financial managers also need to raise the firm's capital when the firm decides to increase its inventory. Finally, The financial manager is in charge of identifying any weaknesses that affect the firm's overall profitability by using financial ratios to benchmark other companies. On the other hand, accounts receivable refers to the funds due from a customer. Instead of immediately paying cash, a customer can choose to pay for his or her purchases at a later time. During the period in between, the amount due is recorded under account receivable and is later removed when the amount due has been collected. The firm's credit policy, which is under the Chief Financial Officer or the CFO's control, is a set of rules that dictates the flow of accounts receivable. It is incredibly important to arrive at the most suitable credit policy for the firm, since it affects sales, the amount of funds tied up in receivables, and bad debt losses. The CFO must set a credit period, the length of time customers have to pay for their purchases. While customers tend to prefer longer credit periods, this is a disadvantage to the firm since it lengthens the cash conversion cycle. Next, the CFO should determine discounts or price reductions given for early payment as an incentive for customers. Third, the CFO establishes credit standards or the financial strength customers must exhibit to qualify for credit. Not all customers are given a chance to pay at a later date. The firm decides based on whether or not the customer is likely to and able to make the required payment on time. Finally, the CFO creates a collection policy or the degree of toughness the firm will exhibit when enforcing the credit terms. This policy is intended to motivate customers who don't pay their debts on time to do so. Aside from setting the credit policy, it is also important to actually, implement it. Thus, the firm's credit manager must work hand in hand with the credit department to ensure that there is fast, accurate, and updated information. Several organizations actually sell detailed credit reports about specific businesses, while for individuals, credit scores ranging from 0 to 10 are given. These indicate how likely a customer is to default on the required payment. Monitoring accounts receivable outstanding is another of the firm's main concerns. Accounts receivable is determined by the volume of credit sales multiplied by the average length of time between sales and collections. If managers aren't watchful, good customers could start taking longer to pay, and sales could be made to weaker customers who tend to pay slowly or not at all. To monitor accounts receivable, the firm uses the days sales outstanding ratio and compares it to the industry average. Having a great inventory and receivables management system is wonderful, but how can it exist without short-term financing? Actually, it can't, which is why we now take a look at the different sources of short-term financing, such as accounts payable and bank loans. Accounts payable, also known as trade credit, is the largest single category of short-term debt and is a spontaneous source of financing as it arises from ordinary business transactions. It refers to debt arising from credit sales and recorded as an account receivable by the seller and as an account payable by the buyer. In other words, it is similar to the concept of accounts receivable, except in this case, the firm plays a role of the customer and the supplier is the one who collects the debt. Thus, if a firm makes a purchase of $1,000 on terms of net 30, it has 30 days to pay the supplier for the goods. The nominal annual cost of trade credit, calculated as shown on screen, enables the firm to determine how much trade credit will cost them per day. There are two types of trade credit. There is free trade credit, which is obtained without a cost. It is the credit received during the discount period. For instance, if a firm is given a 2% discount for the first 10 out of 30 days of the collection period, paying the debt is free for the first 10 days. The other type of trade credit is costly trade credit, which is credit taken in excess of free trade credit. The cost of this is equal to the discount loss. For instance, if that same firm decided to pay in the last 20 days of the collection period, paying the debt has a cost because it gave up the discount of 2%. Meanwhile, bank loans are a sum of money people can borrow from the bank on the condition that they pay the bank back with interest. It has several key features such as the promissory note, which indicates the terms of the bank loan. These terms include the amount of money being borrowed, the maturity of the loan, the interest rate, the frequency of interest payments, collateral, and loan guarantees, among others. Another component of a bank loan is the line of credit, an arrangement in which a bank agrees to lend a specified maximum amount of funds during the designated period and based on the borrower's financial condition. For instance, Bank A may choose to only lend up to 100,000 pesos to Firm B based on the fact that Firm B has a reputation for not repaying its debts on time. Firm B can borrow 100,000 pesos, but before it can borrow more, it must first repay the bank this amount. Generally, the higher the amount granted to you, the more trustworthy you are in the eyes of the bank. A revolving credit agreement is a formal and committed line of credit extended by a bank. It is similar to the informal line of credit, except that the bank has a legal obligation to honor the revolving credit agreement, and the firm must pay the bank a commitment fee, whether or not it actually borrows money from the bank. No two borrowers are treated the exact same way by banks. The cost of its loans varies for different kinds of borrowers at any given point in time and for all borrowers over time. For instance, interest rates are higher for riskier borrowers and higher on smaller loans. Think it's time for you to start your own business? If so, you might want to listen to some of Francisco Colayco's tips on managing working capital, which are outlined in an article entitled Working Capital for Your Business, published on September 9, 2012 on the Good Morning Pilipinas website. In the article, he says that one of the major reasons businesses fail is because of the lack of working capital. There is, after all, a tendency for startup businesses to overspend on rent, the purchase of supplies and furniture, and the construction of the office, instead of reserving funds for future expenses, such as payroll and other bills. Anticipating the sales volume is also a must, lest collection time take much longer than expected and result in bad debt losses. To avoid these scenarios, he says that the credit line is a lifesaver when it comes to contingencies, as it provides a safety net in short-term emergencies. If the bank refuses to give your business a credit line, he suggests that you use your personal assets as collateral to acquire a credit line on an individual capacity. Being aware of how cash flows in your business work will also give you the advantage, since you will be able to use the information to set earlier collection periods or postpone your payables. Recently, Costco Capital Inc., the investment holding firm of retail tycoon Lucio Co., announced that it was preparing a $500 million sale of existing and new shares to increase its public liquidity. This capital raising program came barely a week after Costco Capital announced that it needs 12 billion pesos to take advantage of growth opportunities and pay existing debts. It will also be allocating 1 billion pesos for a working capital investment for rapidly expanding liquor distribution businesses. For more information, check out the article Costco Capital Plans $500 million Share Sale, written by Neil Jerome C. Morales and published in the Philippine Star on May 8, 2013. With all this information, we at Lia and Pia Productions hope you have gained a greater appreciation for working capital management. You've now got what it takes to successfully manage your working capital, and we can't wait to see what you come up with next.